Hi, everyone. Welcome again to another Teacher Joseph podcast. Big news here in the UK from 2 hours ago, and that is that the government has decided to drop plans for the mandatory digital ID to work in the UK. Now, this is a story that I've been following, as you know, for quite some time now. And the government was pushing ahead, forcing us all to have this digital ID. And now it's been dropped completely in a U turn by the government. Now, a U turn is when somebody turns around and faces the other way. So the government has U turned on this particular plan. Let's read and see what they say. The government has dropped plans requiring workers to sign up to its digital ID scheme in order to prove their right to work in the UK, the BBC understands. Digital checks on a right to work will still be mandatory, but people will not have to offer the digital ID when it is rolled out and will instead be able to provide an alternative document, such as a passport. This marks a shift from last year when the government first announced the policy, and Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer told an audience, "You will not be able to work in the UK if you do not have a digital ID. It's as simple as that." And the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, said, "Good riddance. It was a terrible policy anyway." She said the move by Labour represented another U turn because there's been quite a few U turns by the government in the last while. It says here the change of policy is the latest in a series of U turns the government has made since it came to power, including climb downs, that means changing their minds, on welfare reforms, reducing winter fuel payments, and inheritance tax for farmers. Now, it's not really clear what's happening here because it does say that we're still going to have a digital ID. It says here people will not have to offer the digital ID when it is rolled out. So, what's the point of rolling it out then if nobody's going to use it? Let's read on a little bit more. The scheme, it is understood, will now deal less narrowly with immigration, and the government will instead place more emphasis on the argument that digital ID can be a useful tool for the public when accessing public services. Right, well, that means then if they're no longer going to use immigration to bring it in, that means that it may well become an issue for our local regional governments. And as you know, none of them like it anyway. Let's see what else it says. Asked about the issue at an Institute for Government conference earlier on Tuesday, Darren Jones, the minister responsible for rolling out the policy, said it would be a route to the digital transformation of customer facing public services. I have no idea what that means. It seems very strange. It says here a consultation will be launched shortly, adding, "I'm confident this time next year, the polling, that's the voting, will be in a much better place on digital ID than it is today." And it says here the policy had attracted criticism since it was announced last September, with nearly 3 million people signing a parliamentary petition opposing the introduction of digital IDs. Right, so it's we can say then it's dead in the water. I think it's safe to say it's gone. Um, we don't know, of course, what's going to happen next. They do seem to still be talking about it, but Will there still be a Labour government this time next year? Well, I don't know much about politics, but I have to say they're becoming less and less popular, especially when they change their mind. Reform, that's Nigel Farage's party, he said this is a victory for individual liberty against a ghastly authoritarian government. Reform UK would scrap it altogether. Well, I'm not really sure I'll be rushing away to vote for Nigel Farage, but he may well have a point there. It says here a government spokesperson said, "We are committed to mandatory digital right to work checks." Right, here we are with Sky. Government U turns on mandatory digital ID cards for workers. Last year, the government said it would be compulsory to have digital ID for the right to work in the UK. This is what the digital ID could have looked like, is what they're saying. And they're still here calling it a Brit card, which was another big mistake on their part. The government has abandoned plans to make digital ID cards mandatory for workers. Sky News understands digital IDs will no longer be required for the right to work by the end of this parliament set for 2029. Now, just so we can set the record straight here, it's not saying they're not bringing in digital IDs, but what it is saying is these IDs will no longer be compulsory for workers. And that means no longer compulsory for anyone. Last year, the government had said it would be compulsory as a way of reducing illegal working. A government spokesperson said on Tuesday, "We are committed to mandatory digital right to work checks." And then it goes on to talk about the things that they said would make our lives better, including the right to work. It says here, "We've always been clear that details on the digital ID scheme will be set out following a full public consultation, which will launch shortly." Really? A full public consultation? Well, that's new, because in the past they were saying they were going to bring it in. Well, even if they have this full public consultation, it's not going to get very far, especially now since they're saying, well, workers won't need it. They're still saying here, though, digital ID will make everyday life easier for people, ensuring public services are more personal, joined up, and effective. According to the Times, while right to work checks will still be mandatory, other forms of documentation, such as an electronic visa or passport, will be valid, not just digital ID. The Conservatives accused Sir Keir Starmer of spinelessness, while the Lib Dems said the plan was doomed to failure. It is the 13th U turn. That means a change, a turnaround of policy by this government. Well, that's very sad. Just 4 months ago, Sir Keir said, "You will not be able to work in the UK if you don't have a digital ID." Yeah, and now they're saying, well, let's just forget about it. You can work in the UK anyway. Um, so, yeah, it goes on to say how very strange this is. But let's be clear, they're not saying they're getting rid of it. They're just saying that you won't actually need it to work in the UK. But isn't that the same thing? Isn't that just making it optional? The whole thing seems rather strange, but I suppose it's their very polite way of saying it's a U turn. And there we are. Very interesting. Very interesting. So, finally, an end to this terrible, terrible idea that we were going to have digital IDs. But I have a feeling that this has not gone away forever, and that in the coming months or years, at some point, somebody is going to try to bring this back, probably under the threat of war. Well, we'll see what happens. But right now, this will be my last podcast on digital IDs. They've gone away, at least for the moment. That's it from me.